All right, next up we have a experienced and talented group to speak about the competitive advantage of software agility. This is really one of the overall themes of today, so very excited about this panel. We have Corey Jaskolski, CEO of Rake Labs, a data company that solves the problem of labeling large geospatial video and image data sets without time-intrusive human labeling or pre-built models. Derek Strausbaugh, a gentleman who has held many, good job, Derek, who has held many positions within Microsoft, is now their DoD mission team leader. And Dan Ridge, who has spent his career in aerospace and defense, including time at NASA. He is now a program manager at DARPA. And for moderator today, we have the newly announced Chief Revenue Officer, TJ Rowe. Take it away, TJ.
Thank you, Sam. So this is going to be the last panel before we break for lunch, but really excited to dive into this topic with the group here. Software agility is really kind of an easy topic to get after as a competitive advantage. It's no secret that over the last 20 years, software agility has really become, one could argue, the greatest strategic advantage that we have here in America. Certainly from an economic and value creation perspective. We all probably know the Mark Andreessen manifesto 13 years ago that software is eating the world. And today that has really become true. Software powers nearly every facet of our physical world, but not so much in the defense and national security sector where we all spend our time. We are now 7 decades into the computer revolution, 5 decades since the invention of the microprocessor, 3 decades into modern internet, and a little over a decade and a half into the cloud computing adoption curve. The majority of technology required to transform the defense ecosystem through software exists today, and in many cases can be widely delivered globally at scale. For the majority of military service members or public servants, the reality still exists that the best piece of technology they'll interact with throughout their entire career is the iPhone or the Android that's in their pocket. It's not the technology that's fielded to them by our federal government. And then lastly, I don't think we can have this conversation without touching on AI. I don't want to dive down the AI rabbit hole with the group here, but if you look at the past 18 months, contrary to popular belief, AI was not invented 18 months ago when OpenAI launched GPT-1, but it's a microcosm of the speed with which commercial software is moving and how do we capture that in defense and national security. So before we jump in, I'll pass it to my esteemed colleagues here for a couple introductions, and then we'll get into it. Daniel.
Well, let me first say what a delight it is to be here and to thank the sponsors at Silver, Gold, and Platinum. And one of the things that struck me when I came in is that that's something that changes over time, the relative value of Platinum and Gold. Today, the spot price of gold is about twice that of Platinum, so I'm very sorry to the Platinum sponsors here. But that's actually one of the reasons that agility is so important. Software doesn't change just for its own sake, but because the world changes. The cost of raw inputs change, and that's one of the things that keeps America on top.
Well, thanks for having me here. I'm Corey Jaskolski, and the founder and CEO of Rake Labs, a company that builds detection models and effectively finds things in massive scale data sets without needing pre-trained models or labeled data. And started the company after a long career in exploration, where I was the National Geographic Rolex Explorer of the Year, working all over the world building AI models for National Geographic missions, which in a lot of cases with anti-poaching and the like were not that different than the Department of Defense missions and IC missions that we're working in now.
Likewise, thank you for the invite today. Very privileged to sit up on stage with this panel. Derek Strausbaugh. I run our mission team at Microsoft. I also dual hat as our CTO for our defense business. I would just say, just going back over my career, which is longer than I care to admit at this point, my first job while I was in grad school and after undergrad, obviously, was working for a company that right around the advent of that internet age and the dot-com boom was aggregating data and sending real-time news information to everything from stock exchanges to other news agencies. And so I gained a very early appreciation for the value of software and data to competitive advantage. There were days when I felt like I was the most informed person on earth because I was literally tapped into a real-time feed of information from all around the world all day long. And I could see, all sorts of, world events and interesting things in the financial markets happening literally all day long. And when I transitioned to DoD, then not so long thereafter, this has become kind of a personal thing for me over the years, is this urgency with data and software. So really great topic to get into today.
I think the most powerful representation that we have here today across all of our panels is the diversity of input and diversity of thought here. On this panel, we have a program manager out of DARPA that oversees all of the chaos, I believe, half the chaos at least. Representation from startup leadership, working in defense and national security, and an enterprise technology firm that is a partner to many of us. And I was told I can't make any Microsoft Teams jokes today, but we'll see.
I said have at it.
But with this group, when we kind of define software agility, a lot of times we get scoped around ideation to implementation to fielding. How quickly is a capability being developed and delivered to an end user, warfighter, public servant, whoever that might be? But the magic of software is the iteration cycle. It's how quickly you can get the capability of the end user, create a customer feedback loop, and then rapidly iterate on the output of that capability. From each of your perspectives, and Corey, we'll start with you, what's the state of the union from your perspective in delivering technology to this community from a software agility perspective? And I think what we see, these panels included, there's a lot of noise with technology in this ecosystem as well.
That's right.
From an operator viewpoint, how do you separate the signal from the noise?
Yeah, good question. I'll answer the couple different parts of that. The first is that the ability to quickly deploy innovation is critical to success, whether it's commercial or defense or intelligence. And if you look at the commercial world, where the state of the union is, if there's a need and you have a tool that fills that need, you can get that in that solution the same day often, right? And granted, of course, in DoD and IC, there's much more risk to bringing on new technologies. There's change management, there's other things like that. But I think getting a little closer, every step that we can get closer to that commercial adoption cycle, because innovation, it's not on an 18-month cycle or a 5-year cycle. Innovation's on literally a daily cycle, and you see some of this stuff coming out that I think is really impactful to the mission, but has a hard time getting in there. And I think a lot of that comes down to the ability to experiment. So there's lots of good challenges that happen in IC and DoD that people can use some common data and participate in these code challenges and hackathons. But I think we need a lot more than that. I think we need domains that are not on the high side, where software can be deployed to test out. And I think we need that broadly across DoD and IC, because that is how the best and most innovative solutions rise to the top. And that also cuts through the signal of noise. Everybody is using AI these days, right? I'm sure if there's any investors in the room, you haven't seen a pitch deck in 18 months that hasn't mentioned AI, even if they're making waffles. But the point is there's so much noise that I think you got to test. That's how we test new tools in industry, to make sure that they're actually going to be useful and not just noisy. And I think the ability to sort of more openly be able to test and head-to-head compare these things, not just through these hackathons, but through an environment where people can test things not on the high side easily across these different domains, is really what's needed.
Yeah, I'll just build a little bit on some of Corey's comments and then interject a couple other things. I do think a lot of the challenge with introducing new software, or even changes to existing software into the ecosystem, is the availability of environments that are kind of straddle the line, if you will, between open for experimentation and then secure and instrumented for cybersecurity. What you often find, and whether it's high side or not, is this environment's locked down, we've put guardrails on you. Okay, well, I'm bringing something in here that fundamentally breaks because of the guardrails that you've imposed upon me for whatever reason. Or, it's wild, wild west, and nobody needs or wants that either. So I think, figuring out some of the acceptable patterns that, again, are based on risk assessment and risk acceptance, I think, for experimentation are super, super important. To Corey's point, hackathons are great, but they're the exception rather than the rule. And as a result, it's too hard. I can give you a real example where a very senior person in one of the military departments literally was going around 10 cupping looking for an environment in which to run some innovative software for a highly visible exercise that's coming up in the next couple months. That's a shame.
Was it me?
No, it wasn't you. But that gets down also to, it's very hard to authorize these environments. And I think we talk about ATOs, and we can get into that topic later, I think, but the real challenge gets down to, well, how do I know what risk I'm actually accepting? Because what we've basically got are Excel spreadsheets or Word documents that's coming from the Microsoft guy. I know it sounds weird. That's not the way to authorize a system. And at the end of the day, I feel like we give the authorizing official and the controls assessors and the folks in that ecosystem very little to work with, and as a result, it's really hard to stand up the environments that we do need to do experimentation, introduce new capabilities, and even modify existing capabilities to be so that we can get to a point of agility.
I think that's exactly right. So I'm sorry, I was preoccupied by waffles there for a minute. So I think that the state of the union is actually not that great. And one of the reasons for that is exactly noise, and that we have in some cases conflated how fast I can build and ship a new revision, which is not agility, with true agility, right? Because agility is just a value judgment on the things that we value. And in each of those cases, both our best partner and our biggest adversary is not necessarily a near-peer competitor. It's a skill-craft pen that's going to be used to either accept some risk or is going to be used to accept a different risk that makes the entire effort irrelevant, right? And so that's why it's hard to sometimes see what the true agility is beneath the churn of the build systems and the like.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of great software being built. There's no question about it. The challenge is getting it fielded. That's right.
Yeah, and we're really only touching on kind of step one of fielding. We're talking about the pain point of experimentation rapidly for agility. We're not even getting into now how do we move from R&D networks, synthetic data networks into operational environments, mission environments, real world data, real-time data. It's a real challenge.
I think that's exactly right. And my own view is that we have to develop like we train, like we fight. And we need to make that much more of a continuum, and that we need to focus also, especially on the high side, on the sustainment challenges. It's easy for me to make a risk decision to allow an exercise to proceed, but it's much harder for me to make a risk decision that it's okay to keep it in a container unguarded when we're not using it for our exquisite act. And that's something that we leave on the table when we think about the shiny part of the exercise.
So I'm going to move into a question here on partnerships. It's no secret to anybody that's operated in this ecosystem or this market for some time that it's not like pure commercial technology markets. You don't build the best technology and you win because you're the best technology. You can't go it alone. There are partnerships across value-added resellers, infrastructure providers, ability to navigate the Department of Defense or the intelligence community. From each of your perspectives, Derek, we'll start with you. Just really is such a core component of Microsoft. What is the importance of technology partnerships, and how do you leverage that to enable the ISVs that are running on your infrastructure, your partners across the Department of Defense?
Yeah, I mean, alone and unafraid isn't going to work. And I think that's kind of in the DNA of certainly our company when it comes to operating in the federal market. I mean, there's a vast series of partnerships, even some of them like, a few years ago, people would just scratch their head and go, wow, Microsoft and Oracle are doing stuff together? That seems antithetical to everything I know, but I mean, that's the state of the world that we're in. Corey's company and us and ours, we're working very closely together to solve some hard problems in the DoD and the Intel spaces. To your point, TJ, I mean, there's lots of value add at kind of all different disciplines within kind of that partner ecosystem, and navigating it, frankly, is challenging, particularly for defense-focused small or medium-sized companies who are trying to navigate this thing and maybe don't necessarily have the resources that we do, and certainly don't have the proximity that the government folks do to kind of help them through the process as well. So, I mean, somebody referenced Manhattan Project earlier. I mean, I see this as a whole of nation challenge to get us to the point where we can really leverage the competitive agility that we do have through our innovation base. And so the only way you get there is through partnership.
Yeah, I kind of want to pull on that thread a little bit. So partnerships really take many, many forms. Enterprise technology companies, startups, resellers, academia, there's a wide array here. How do you navigate, particularly from the program manager perspective, the startup perspective, navigate executing on partnerships that maybe not all of the incentives are perfectly aligned, and the timescales are not perfectly aligned, and the outcomes aren't exactly agreed upon? I think we're seeing this with a lot of conflict between open source and closed source communities. Sure. How do we capture the speed and the outcome of what you're going for with a capability, but navigate all those parties involved?
Well, I think that one of the mistakes we make when we think about partnerships is thinking about partnerships having, especially in government, junior partners, senior partners, mirroring the prime and sub dynamic. And something I learned as a parent, where I thought I was the senior partner, is that is not the case. That when you have a partner, whether you're the parent or you're the child or you're the adult child of a parent, the things that your partner wants are important to them, even if you don't understand why. And that took me being a parent to learn. And so what I learned about partnerships really is that if you're entering into a partnership and you feel like you and your partner want exactly the same thing, first of all, you need to walk away because you're confused. But second, neither of you are going to get anything out of it. These partnerships are like ion strengthened glass, like the Gorilla Glass on your smartphone. It takes the insertion of that alternate element to create the strength. And so a challenge on timescales, however, is when you may want similar things, but you want them on different timescales. And that's something that's especially important at DARPA, where we do programs of very finite duration, sometimes under 2 years, with a goal of having a strategic impact in a decade. So those are certainly programs we cannot do alone and unafraid. We need a partner who's operating on a different timescale and figuring out how to navigate that. And sometimes the answer is composition, first and then the second, the same way I'm going to die and my kids are going to inherit all my stuff. Not a bad model.
Kind of dark, though. But yeah, I think, well, first, before I directly answer the question, I want to pull on something that Derek said, because I think it was exactly the right way to think about it. You mentioned this in the light of the Manhattan Project. And I think, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, the pace of technology wasn't such that it was as critical as it is now. I think it is getting to Manhattan level project criticality. We need to win, especially in the AI space, in many other spaces as well. But the AI race is on, and I don't know. There's lots of ideas on where we line up with China right now. Some say we're winning, some say we're losing. But the only thing I do know is we can't lose. That's not an option. And because of that, it is Manhattan level project sort of criticality that we need to reach here. And that's only going to be achieved through partnerships. That's not going to be achieved through a 50-person company like myself, running into the wind. And it's not going to be achieved by the big cloud and platform and services companies as well. We all got to come together to make that happen. But in terms of, you asked how do you work these partnerships even when there might not be perfect alignment in sort of needs or wins. I think the first part of that is really trying to understand at the outset what your partners do need. And we've got two great partners in the room, Microsoft. I think everyone probably saw an announcement came out last year that Microsoft gave us 1 million hours on some of the highest GPU compute they have to run our tool across it. And then we've got Booz in the room as well, who we did a joint product with called Bighorn, which runs our tool directly on the edge, so it can be deployed in the field. But in both cases, I think we came to the table with both of those partners and really worked out first, hey, what are you looking to get out of this? What are we looking to get out of this? And made sure those were aligned, and I think that was critical to success.
We've got a good follow-up here from the audience on this topic. And it's spot on that software agility is no longer sufficient. It's really table stakes on these types of developments. Technology now requires multi-cloud, hybrid cloud, variations of infrastructure between core cloud and then also edge disparate compute systems, data interoperability, human capital, training and management. What ways of working and patterns have you seen be successful?
There's a lot to unpack back on that one.
If any?
Yeah, I would just say, again, based on the theme of partnership, one of the things that always takes projects down the wrong path, and I guess I'll be continue the dark theme here, is the sort of stratification and separation of companies, performers, if you will, on these various programs and projects, rather than bringing performers and companies together on these projects. And I think that's where, again, agility gets compromised. If Corey's team is off doing something, and our team is off doing something, and the DARPA team is off doing something, and we're supposed to all smush it together in the end, that fails 9 times out of 10. And I think that is as a guy who's run lots of projects over the years, that is something I see fail time and time again, not only from an acquisition perspective, but just from an orchestration perspective on large software development efforts, where it's this assumption that it'll all come together in the end. And
systems integrators play a critical role.
That's exactly where I was going. System integrators play a critical role in bringing the glue to those sort of efforts. And where they're not there, that's where these things go south. And then that's also where you see, sort of the dark mark get put beside the innovation side of things. Well, that didn't work, so we would have been better off staying where we were.
One of the things I think is that we get sometimes to our benefit and sometimes to our detriment wrapped up in the physicality of the computing that is doing the cloud work for us. And DoD and USG, that's certainly the case when we think about data confidentiality rules that are rooted in the physicality of that machine. On the other hand, I want to laud Microsoft for the terrific work that Azure has been doing to push vendors for auditable firmware. That's an area where we had not paid perhaps enough attention to the physicality of compute, and it took the heft of a cloud vendor to really drive that in the marketplace.
Yeah, and your question asked a little bit about edge, cloud, and human capital, and so I'll tie those all together, from a startup perspective. So one of the things that a startup is always going to struggle with is there's more variance that we're generally asked for our software than we have people to do. So some people want edge, but some people by edge they mean running on a little NVIDIA board on a drone. Some people mean edge, big rack-mounted computer on-prem. And so cloud is always going to be the easiest for startups to go at. I mean, once you start managing edge and the like, you end up in a pretty big scenario where you can have lots of different compute targets. So I think I would argue that part of innovation and increasing the speed of innovation through software agility is to continue to adopt the cloud everywhere possible. We have a lot of DoD and IC customers asking for on-prem, and we'll deliver like that because that's what we need to do. But it does take energy off of the core development of what we think is very innovative software that we could move faster on if there was more adoption of the cloud and less on-prem. But
Yeah.
Well, it's a total cost of ownership challenge. For any early software company or new entrant, you can't follow a traditional SaaS model where you build once, deploy many. You're building once, and then you're building 10 times, and you have a forked version for each of these customers.
Exactly.
You're managing multiple environments with different hardware and different expectations. For a lot of these startups, you don't have cleared folks that can go sit on site and observe how your application's performing in runtime and actually establish the customer feedback loop that you're looking for to continue to iterate on that product.
And this is where, as industry, particularly in the cloud space, I think we're all evolving as well. Because if you went and looked at what our various platforms did 3-4 years ago, there was hyperscale cloud services that ran. And if you were well connected, sitting in a chair at DARPA or at the Pentagon, or name your favorite installation of choice, you were good to go. If you were at the edge of survivability, operating in a tactical environment, et cetera, cloud wasn't a thing for you. And so this is where we've poured a bunch of money into R&D, and I just speak broadly for industry too. I know it's been poured in elsewhere to sort of close the gap on that continuum, if you will. I mean, we've moved towards at least what we call internally more of an adaptive cloud strategy, where it's like edge and cloud really should be the same thing. And there's very few large programs, and certainly that's true of weapon systems, that don't have the need for both. and they have to be able to, you have to be able to build once, deploy mostly everywhere. Everywhere is obviously the panacea. There are going to be cases where you can't do that, but we want to lower the number of places where that's the case. And I think we've all kind of evolved our product capabilities and the way we think about infrastructure from enterprise out to the edge a lot over the past couple of years. And that's based on direct feedback from this community, which again is indicative of the partnership that is required across industry and software vendors, et cetera, with government.
I think that leveraging, to pick up on that, I think that one of the things that we do to leverage investments at the edge to drive down cost in the data center and vice versa is something that we actually have a terrific template for as a country when we made the decision to go after microprocessor-based HPC in the 80s through vehicles like MCC to avoid a moment where we were imperiled as today with the Japanese dumping of HPC vector supercomputers.
Right.
We didn't, at the time we made that strategic decision, know how to get strategic computing out of microprocessors. We knew that America could deliver microprocessors and made our investment on that basis. And so to your point about AI, I think that's another kind of moment where we are.
I think that's a great segue and kind of the next question here, really for Dan. The speed with which some of these capabilities, the model development, the algorithmic advancements, the compute advancements, just over the last 18 months, from a DARPA perspective, you live in the world of over-the-horizon investments. Does the speed of commercial technology today change how you view those over-the-horizon investments and how we're executing on those programs, or does it?
Well, it absolutely does. I mean, I think that a very healthy thing that has been reinforced at DARPA recently is that we want to track the vector of the state of the art, not just at the time we create a program, but through its life. It's easy to start a program now that's simply overtaken by events before, honestly, before it's even contracted. So we need to be constantly looking at that and making a decision about whether we're going to make bets about where that trend is going, or whether we want to broaden to alternate modalities of sensing, of computing, of whatever, that are simply orthogonal to the state of the art. And that is a balancing act, to be sure.
And one thing about the rapid speed of growth in AI and the other technologies in the last 18 months is it truly is exponential. And I think people have a really hard time visualizing exponential growth in any way, shape, or form. It's not like things are accelerating a little more than they were before. I mean, exponential is, some dude eats a pangolin in Wuhan or something like that, and we all have COVID a year later, right? That's exponential growth. And that's the state of technology right now. It's growing really at that speed. It's and that's I think it's going to change not just how we need to respond to stay agile in DoD and IC, but it's going to change everything. And I think we're starting to see that already.
I think that's right. To pick up on that exponential, because that's so important, that when we say exponential, we're often talking about the tail, right? Chasing the asymptote. But the beginning of exponential is boring.
Right.
That second day, that's
yeah.
boring, right? That first week, that's pretty boring. And so we often ignore that part, even though that's where exponential comes from, is that same exponent.
So when we think about kind of going back to the topic a little bit, software agility is a competitive advantage. Just a baseline, we talk about acquisition a lot in this community. It's topic du jour always. We've beat that horse to death over the last couple of years, and there's really positive things happening. And of course, it's a core component of achieving this outcome that we all want. What outside of acquisition do we need to be doing better in this ecosystem?
I'll take a swing at the human capital side of it, and it's not probably what you typically hear. I don't know if there are any authorizing officials or SCAs or ISMs or what have you in the room, but that's a very hardworking community. I told TJ this analogy earlier, so I'm going to use it again. Like, I see the AO on most software projects as like the kicker on a football team. They can be, the most popular person on the team when they put it through the uprights with 3 seconds left and you win, and they can be the loneliest person on the field when they don't put it through the uprights. And the reason is rarely because they aren't working superhuman, heroic things to get things done. They lack the lowercase I infrastructure in a lot of cases. And we just don't give them a lot of help. Visibility and data is key to being able to move software around and to be agile. You need the foundation upon which to build repeatability. So that's kind of thing one. Thing two is, like I said earlier, there's a lot of great software being built by industry, by hardworking folks at all the software innovation hubs that we've stood up. There's lots of great DevSecOps practices being followed. Like, all the software modernization strategy goals are actually happening. The challenge is getting things kind of from step 1 to step 2 to step 3 to deployed and then ultimately sustained. And there's a lot of noise there in the deployment and sustainment part of things. I'll pick on one thing just because this is something that is sort of near and dear to my heart, is it's hard to make a change to a system and even deploy that from environment A to environment B. And some of that is just wrapped up in things as foundational and as boring as, again, going back to high side stuff, cross-domain environments. There's policy there that is antithetical to scale. It's hard to onboard. It's hard to get approvals to use even capabilities that do exist, let alone introduce new capabilities or new file types into that. And then ultimately, there's lots of redundant testing that goes along with it. It's not to say that the policies that exist and the people that exist that are trying to keep that from becoming Wild Wild West too aren't doing good jobs. But as we look at policy and practices and acquisitions, we need to look at all these little pieces too, because if there was a reference earlier when the congressmen were up here to the Ukraine and the Red Sea. If you think you're going to make an over-the-air update to a drone or a drone swarm based on a data point that you collected a few seconds ago, and you're going to go through a process that requires a gazillion approvals to deploy software and to use a software guard to go from some unclassified environment up to system high, the way things are today, you're kidding yourself. So, like, we have to arm the folks that are trying to do these jobs with not only the tech, but the supporting policy that goes along with doing it.
Yeah, and even though acquisitions is still challenging, my favorite thing an acquisitions person ever told me in DoD was, we're good at acquiring yesterday's technology tomorrow. But although it still needs some work, right? I think, as a startup CEO, I think startups actually need to take a little more ownership of the challenge and the problem too. I think this, the valley of death is real, but the fact is something like 8 out of 10 startups fail. So a lot of the corpses in the valley of death were going to be there anyways. It's not just this acquisitions problem, right? And likewise, I mean, coming out with a great new technology and just expecting any massive organization, DoD and IC, or any private corporation that is just going to do the change management needed to use your shiny new thing, I think is a little misguided. And I think a lot of us, a lot of our companies, including us in the beginning, we sort of expected, we're having these challenges because of acquisition and things like that. But when you start thinking about it from a little bit different of a light, I think it becomes clear that you can do a lot more as a startup to take ownership of that and be a good partner with DoD and IC.
Yeah, the valley of death tends to become a little bit hyperbolic.
It does.
It's no different than a traditional power law effect.
Yeah, it's the same in the commercial world. They just don't call it the valley of death. It's just startups that didn't work, right? So.
Yep.
I think that's right. In fact, most restaurants are startups, and they have the same behavior. So enjoy your dinner tonight.
I did financial services for years. Same thing exists there.
Yep.
This is my used research salesman jacket because, as a DARPA program manager, fundamentally what I do is I acquire research and then make it available to partners. But we know that we can't buy the future, right? And when we do try, we wind up trying to buy the life cycle. And we try to buy it rather than acquire it. And one of the things that's difficult for us to do with the acquisition lens, if we're buying power by the hour or other life cycle buys like that, is place a value that we get on upstreaming into open source community, into other trusted repositories that we're not set up to reward performers for success in that way. And that's to our disadvantage. I mean, my career started with Linux and actually funded by DARPA, which we accepted as a collateral win, not as the intended product. Now I think we understand that could be a desired outcome.
We've just got time here for one more question, but you can't execute any form of agility in this ecosystem without people. It's a bit antithetical to kind of pure technologists and how they operate commercially, but you can't get a piece of technology to the hands of an end user or a warfighter without the program office, program manager, TPOC, the assignments officer, the contracting officer. There's people across a wide value stream spectrum. So how do you view culture, human capital, not as a blocker, but as an enabler, and the ability to meet those folks where they are in delivering these capabilities?
So I would say, I'm going to leap on that, because my time at DARPA is short, I got to act. So DARPA is a short-term organization where people are only there for a short time, which means I'm looking at one of you to be my replacement. And you may have been my competitor or done some other role. You may have been my performer. You may have been my transition partner. But I need you to complete the cycle here. And so please see me afterwards. But one of the things about agility is Belvin Conway's law, that a software product is the communication graph of the team who built it. And what he left out was not that he didn't say it was isomorphic, it's that he didn't include the customer in that. And once, especially with DoD and our partners, once we consider the customer as part of that communication graph, that's what actually gets us the agility. And the agility in the product is a sign that we have an agile relationship ourselves. So sometimes we should be looking for agility as a sign of a symptom of technical health rather than the outcome.
For me, sort of on the human side of it, it's a couple things. One, make your developers use your software that you've created, because then they're going to get a similar experience the end user is actually going to get. And that sounds simple, but it's actually sort of profound sometimes, because the people that are writing the code won't live with any quality of life hassles and the like. So they'll change things pretty quick if you make them use it. But the other thing is, of course, just realize that we're all on the same team. We're all looking for the same thing. The people on the other end of that phone, have very aligned goals as citizens of the United States that we all do. So that makes it makes a bridge that makes it pretty easy to communicate, I find.
Yeah, mine's actually real simple here on the human capital side. Show and do together, don't tell. You learn more by listening and observing and working together than you ever will by going in with a formed opinion.
Well, we're getting the signal. Gentlemen, thank you so much for the time today. Thank you for joining us at Offset. I believe next up is lunch. Back to Sam Gray.
Awesome. Let's give a big round of applause for Corey, Dan, and Derek. And a fantastic moderation by TJ. So awesome.